January 3rd, 1995. You had a health scare, right?
Yep.
And you feared that you had perhaps, was it like breast cancer, which some men are diagnosed?
So it started out as just kind of a lump on my chest that hurt. And I was talking to a friend and he said, men can get breast cancer, and that really freaked me out. A lot of the quarters that I had at OSU, I didn't have health insurance, so I couldn't afford it. So I would just kind of off and on the quarter decide whether I was going to get it. And that particular one, I did have health insurance. So I wanted to get it checked out.
So you go to a medical facility on campus at Ohio State University, and take us through what happened from there.
So I walked in and they triaged me to a nurse, and the nurse, just asked me some questions or whatever. And then they sent me into a room. They said Dr. Strauss was going to come in. And to be really frank, I didn't remember his name this year when all this stuff happened. I just remember what happened. Part of my journey and what I talk about through my second book is going through all those the traumatic memories to remember his name and everything. But anyway, so he came in and he introduced himself, and it was weird. It was like, I was obviously gay. I wasn't really out so much, I wasn't out so much to my parents. So I was kind of like in one of those phases where I was, I had been religious when I was in the military, and I was having a difficult time coming out and stuff. So it wasn't a really great, period for me and my own, visibility as far as being in the LGBT community. So I was kind of closeted a little bit. And so he started asking me all these questions, and it just felt weird because the minute I got in there, he looked at me weird, and it just felt like that something was up. I didn't know what it was. I was just, basically a kid. I was a little bit older than most people. But he started asking questions like, what's your major? And, some of that stuff is, it's fine. You expect that from your doctor to ask you normal questions. And then he asked what I did. And I told him that I do some volunteering at HIV testing. And back in the 90s, really, for anybody to associate anything about themselves with anything HIV probably meant that you were either cool with gay people or you knew gay people, or somehow there could be an assumption, something that you were gay or anything. And so he asked me point blank, he's like, "Are you gay?" right away. And so then that's when I got a little bit alarmed, because I thought, I totally could understand if I was going in for, some kind of an STD or some kind of question that it would matter, and so I was kind of offset by that question. It just made me think, why is he asking that? Just because I said I tested people or whatever. So I kind of dodged it and said, I don't know, and unfortunately I feel like that probably prompted him to feel like that I was a little bit vulnerable because maybe I wasn't out. So he knew that he could take advantage of that. And so he immediately started getting really gross. Now, the question got worse and worse. He started asking, about sexual habits. If I slept with one person, and didn't I want more? And don't I find it difficult sleeping with one person? Just all these really gross kind of questions. And I think he was turning himself on more the more he asked that kind of stuff. And so when we got to the examination, he had me completely declothed, so no clothes at all, for a chest, examination. He did a full testicle examination, a rectal examination, and told me that it was all necessary. I was really uncomfortable because I told him, I'm being followed by my doctor and trying to, it was almost like a self-defense mechanism to say, there's no reason, I don't need this check. And so I tried that, and he wasn't gloved. He didn't use any gloves. It's just gross. But anyway, so by the time we got to where he wanted to check my chest, he laid me down on a table and started kind of rubbing my chest in a sexual way, not like I didn't feel like it was an examination. And that's when I 100% knew everything was wrong, because he pushed his pelvis against me and he had an erection and just held me there and rubbed my chest. And it felt like it was forever. It was really gross. Everything felt like forever. The testicle examination, the anal examination, it all just went on forever. But then when he shoved that erection against me and just held me there, it was almost like I was a prisoner. And then he was just holding me there. And, It's kind of funny the way you started this about talking about people's perceptions about strength or resiliency. I just wrote the last chapter, which I think is actually going to be the first chapter of my new book. And it talks about that, because I think that it's an important point, that something that I learned in this whole process was that Strauss was 5'10", I think, and he was 160 pounds. Any one of the thousands of people that he molested could have beaten the shit out of that guy. I mean, easily could have just destroyed him, broke his neck, done anything. These guys were wrestlers, And I've been in the military. It's not about physical strength. It's about power. And Strauss had power because he was a physician. And any one of those kids could have lost their scholarship if they challenged somebody, or if they got somebody in trouble and then it turned south for them. I could have lost my dietetic internship because he was a medical doctor. And I turned around and applied to OSU to be able to get my internship, which I needed to become a registered dietitian. So there's a lot of intimidation about, am I going to go against a doctor and complain about this? There's a lot of feelings about that. So I think that one of the things that I really wanted to discuss in that was that, sexual assault is an act of power. And it's not, when people question people for so many reasons. I mean, memory is another thing that I went through with this whole experience. I read a whole chapter on that what happened after the meeting was that I complained, and then they ended up having me come in and meet with Strauss. Now, in 2018, when I first, came forward about this, I couldn't remember that meeting. I did not remember a bit of it. And, my lawyers contacted me and said, "Did you have a meeting with him?" And I told them, "No, I don't remember having a meeting at all." And so then I started to think through my whole experience, and I thought, something, I remember Strauss yelling at me, and I don't know how I knew that, because I was like, how would I have known that? Because everything that I remember when I'm telling them that I talked to this Grace guy and everything and complained, I don't ever remember physically talking to Strauss. So there was a hole in my memory that I couldn't remember how I knew that. And that started to drive me insane. I mean, so much so that my husband was saying, don't try to recreate a memory that doesn't exist. And coworkers who are therapists said, I'm sure that you would have remembered that. And I started doubting myself until the point, now this is where your John Grisham novel comes in, till the point where I was like, I've got to know. And it said, Perkins Coie, the investigators, had written me and said, we've found something that said you went to a meeting and you took a romantic partner at the time. So instantly I started to analytically think, how am I going to figure out if I went to that meeting and what happened at that meeting and who I took? And so I went back and got into Excel, and in cell A2, I wrote my birthday, and then I wrote I was born. And I was like, as stupid as that sounds, once I clicked enter, like a little bit of anxiety went away, because that's like something I know. I remember, I will not forget, I knew that. So then I was like, graduated high school. Then I was like, started college, and when I got my first job and what car I bought. And so I started to go through anything I could, whether it was pictures or newspaper articles, anything, and anything that had a solid date, I would put it on that timeline and then start sorting it. So by the end of the time, I went right to that date of January 3rd, 1995, and went over and knew exactly where I was living, who I was dating, who I was friends with. And instantly, I was like, okay, that would have been who I took to the meeting. And then I started calling all the people I was friends with and asking them if they remember me talking about it. And I worried that the guy that said that I was dating at the time, I had heard that he passed away. So I was like, oh crap, I won't be able to talk to him. But then I found out through investigation that he wasn't passed away. He was in California, actually, and started to, I contacted I got one of those background check apps and found out that he used to work at this place in Mansfield, Ohio, called them and told them it's really important that I get a hold of him. And they said, we can send him your contact information. The next thing I know, I got a text, and all I did to not lead him is said, do you ever remember me talking about a doctor at OSU? And he responded, I was waiting for you to call me. I remember going to the meeting. He said, I'm not surprised that you called. And so instantly I called him. We had a really long conversation. By the end of the conversation, I was reminding him of stuff that happened in that meeting. And why that's so important is to understand when Dr. Ford or somebody comes forward and they're testifying in these capital hearings and people start questioning them and saying, why now? Why didn't you come forward earlier? Or how convenient is it that you didn't remember this? I really wanted to walk people through that experience. It's so much trauma, and you actually put it away. One of my coworkers said, you put it away into a box 24 years ago, and you think it's all nice and neat. Somebody exposes it, and then now you're trying to get it to fit back in that box, and it won't. And that's the trauma that you're going through. And 100%, I agree with that, because going through that traumatic thing of trying to remember that meeting and everything else it was crazy. I was obsessed with figuring it out. Now I can tell you the color of the paint that was on the wall. I remember everything now. I remember what Strauss looked like. I remember him screaming at me. I mean, there were so many things that at first it was just like, it's 24 years ago. It's a quarter of my life ago. So no, I'm sorry, half of my life. I'm not aging myself that well. But it's pretty crazy, And so anyway, I complained the very next day, called. So the naysayers that say sexual assault victims are conveniently are coming forward now, why, and ask those kind of questions. I waited one day and called them and said, this happened to me and it was wrong, and I want you to know it. And I asked to talk to the top person, which at the time was Ted W. Grace, which was a medical doctor who was the director of student health there. Told him everything had happened. He went and talked to Strauss, called me back and said, he's denying everything. And so, I just got out of the Army, so I wasn't going to take no for an answer. So I told him, I said, that's not acceptable. Like, he did this to me at 100%. So Ted Grace arranged the meeting that I was just talking about, where he had Louise Dowse, which is another counselor that works there, me, Strauss, him, and then I took my boyfriend at the time because I wanted somebody to witness, because it felt, even back then, it felt like something's shady. Because here I was, a kid, they put me in front of these 3 doctors that weren't going to believe me or whatever. So I was like, I want a witness with me. So I took Brian with me. And so we got in this meeting, and Strauss in the beginning of the meeting was so cordial, and he was very, very jovial and introducing himself, kind of like he's going to a cocktail party or something, real arrogant, whatever. And then we started going through the allegations. I started talking about the things that he said. And a lot of them he would discount. He would say, well, it's okay for me to know his sexual orientation because that's part of the examination and that's medically necessary. And then when we got into some of the really inappropriate stuff, he just denied it. And then when we got to the part where I talked about his erection, that's when he slammed his hand down. That's something I just won't forget. I couldn't remember how I knew that he yelled at me. Slammed his hand down the table and said, "You're just trying to ruin my reputation," in front of Grace and Dowse. And they even looked at each other like I don't know what to say or do, because that was just really awkward or whatever. And then now, knowing what we know about sexual assault, we think back and think, Jesus Christ, they put me in front of my abuser and then let him berate me. At the end of the meeting, they basically told me that I was confused and mistaken. And, it was just a misunderstanding was the result of the meeting that they gave me. And then fast forward to today, where we know, 1,500 incidences of sexual assault from Strauss, and, 300 people that have come forward. It just pisses you off.
They're telling you, a gay man, that you're confused about an erection rubbing against you.
He denied the erection. She said that she thinks that Strauss was just a very insensitive provider who asked questions that were just insensitive. And they protected him. They absolutely protected him. Now, what I didn't know back then, that now I know, I would have gone ballistic on all of them had I known the real truth, which came out with the Perkins report, that 2 days earlier, a kid complained about the same thing to that same doctor, Grace, who looked me in the eye and told me that nobody had ever complained before. That just, I can't tell you the injustice that makes me feel now, knowing 24, and I don't even know psychologically, I'm not a counselor, but what would that do to somebody's mind is that you're just finding out that not only were you validated and you were correct 24 years ago when you tried to do what you're doing, you find out that it happened thousands of times, 300 different kids, and then that guy lied to me. And it's just like, you just can't, it's like, I don't even know how to articulate in words how profound that is. And to find all that out and how upset it makes you. And I mean, it's consumed me to the point where, I think I sent you that timeline. I wanted to know everything. At that point, I wanted to rebuild everything that Strauss did and know every single person he affected. and know exactly what happened because I didn't trust anything then.
The hierarchy is with Dr. Grace, who Strauss reported to.
Dr. Miller was Strauss's supervisor. He was kind of on site the whole time, Roger Miller. And Grace was both of their bosses. The reason I know that is that they signed a performance appraisal for Strauss a year after he molested me and gave him an excellent on his performance appraisal signed by his supervisor, Miller, and then his supervisor, Dr. Grace. So after knowledge of him molesting 2 kids, he signed an excellent on his performance appraisal.
It's sounding a lot like a cover-up. To what end is it? Is it to the end of protecting the reputation of the university? Is it money? What is your hunch?
I'm going to be completely fair on all this. I'm never going to say anything without quantifying it. I'm speculating. I don't know. I don't have proof of anything. What I've heard a lot of is that physicians a lot of the times protect other physicians professionally. It's like a courtesy. It's like a cop not giving another cop a ticket, And so I don't know if that was part of it back then. I believe 100% now that there's definitely a cover-up in 2019. And that's not speculation. That's 100% because when I had asked for my paperwork from the 90s, OSU gave me 5 pages of my paperwork and they withheld 16 pages. There's nothing in the law that allows them to do that. It's public information request, the sunshine request. They aren't allowed to do that. There's nothing that says because it makes you look bad or implicates you that you can cover this up. And they intentionally withheld 16 pages of stuff that was everything about my meeting and everything about the kid that came before me and everything about the kid that came after me. So student A, B, and C, all that stuff was in the 16 pages that OSU intentionally for 5 months ignored me when I was asking for that specific information, giving them so much as exactly who was in that meeting. Like the guy that I took to the meeting, they didn't even have his name. And I gave them that name to make sure that they would give me that paperwork. And they just ignored it. So when I finally got really upset and I emailed Dr. Drake, Michael Drake, the president of Ohio State University, the board of trustees, and the media, and copied them all on it. And I said, you guys are breaking the law. You either have to fill this public information request or you have to tell me that this doesn't exist. And I want a response from the board of trustees why you're allowed to break the law. That night, I got an email saying, please sign these waivers. And I told Josh, I'm like, Jesus Christ, they're going to give me it. They're going to give me my paperwork. And that night, I remember looking at him and saying, you just watch. I bet you that they're going to release this all tomorrow. They're going to release the whole Perkins thing tomorrow. And by God, that's exactly what they did. At 9:36, they emailed my stuff to me. And at 10 o'clock, they emailed it to everybody. So they controlled the narrative. They didn't want that narrative out. And they were trying to strategize what they needed to do and how they were going to deal with it and all the stuff that they were going to do. And that's not right. Because that's no different than what they did back in the 90s. There's no difference. What they did back in the 90s was that they wanted to control the narrative and cover it up. And the only thing missing about 2019 and Drake and the Ohio State University of today is another Strauss. They just need another scandal, another person in there. And then they'll justify, hey, let's withhold this. Let's not give this to him. We need to control the narrative. We need to do whatever. And that's not speculation. That happened to me. I have all the emails back and forth where every couple months I'm emailing them saying, this is my 5th time asking for this paperwork. Where is it? And I knew that they had given that to Perkins Coie back in December. So the law actually says that they have a reasonable amount of time. I think that anybody would define if they've already produced that information and given it to someone else, reasonable can't be more than 30 days. So they took 5 months and just ignored me until they were ready for that to come out. And that's not speculation. That's exactly what they did.